The art of war is of vital importance to the state. It is a matter of life and death, a road either to safety or to ruin. Hence, it is a subject of inquiry which can on no account be neglected. This powerful and penetrating quote, spoken by Sun Tzu, or more commonly Sun Tzu, more than 2 millennia ago, still echoes today, emphasizing the importance of strategy when seeking a nation's survival and prosperity. While the original context of the work is the battlefield, Sun Tzu's genius lies in his ability to express timeless principles, adaptable to any scenario where intelligence, planning, and thorough analysis of the opponent to determine success. Strategists and leaders from different eras and fields have found in Sun Tzu's work an endless source of wisdom. One of history's greatest military strategists, Napoleon Bonaparte, attributed part of his success to the book, applying his teachings to overcome armies much larger than his own. Konosuke Matsuhita, the Japanese businessman and founder of Panasonic, learned from the art of war the guiding principles for building one of the world's largest industrial empires. Matsuhita prized discipline, long-term planning, and the importance of knowing the market and competitors, essential elements from Sun Tzu's vision. The work's influence even extends to sports. American football head coach Bill Belichick, considered one of the greatest in NFL history, is known for his fascination with the art of war. He credits it with inspiring his strategic approach and the importance of constantly adapting to the game's circumstances. In an ever more complex and competitive world, the art of war remains an essential guide for leaders in all fields. Its teachings on strategic planning, scenario analysis, resource management, and the ongoing search for competitive advantage are powerful tools for those seeking to achieve success. This video will provide an in-depth analysis of this work, offering examples of successful ways in which its teachings have been applied in various historical contexts, as well as looking at what can happen when these lessons are neglected and their calamitous consequences. Sun Tzu, or Sun Tzu, was a general, military strategist, and philosopher. He is believed to have served the state of Wu, where his military strategy expertise made him a figurehead. The art of war is credited to him and is regarded as a compilation of his teachings and thoughts on war. He is often remembered as a master tactician who achieved several important victories on behalf of the state of Wu. His insights were influenced by his understanding of war as a natural aspect of life, which should be waged with wisdom and cunning. In his search for military and political supremacy, Sun Tzu, in his work The Art of War, lays out 5 essential elements that any leader aiming for success must understand and master. The way, morals and ethics, the paradise, environmental conditions, the land, geography, leadership, qualities of the commander, and discipline, organization and logistics. These mutually dependent and complementary mainstays form the basis of military and political strategy in the Chinese master's vision. The way, moral law, illustrates the cohesion between the political leadership and the armed forces, building a nationwide sense of unity on behalf of the cause. When political decisions and military actions are aligned, the morale of the troops soars, determination is solidified, and resistance to the adversary is unshakable. The leader must act fairly and morally to earn his soldiers' respect and loyalty. An ethical commander inspires trust and devotion. There should also be harmony between the leader and the soldiers. When everyone agrees on a common goal and works in unity, the army's effectiveness increases significantly. The leader must also clearly communicate objectives and strategies, ensuring that everyone understands their role and importance in the mission. Sun Tzu argues that an army adhering to the way will be in sync with its leader and hold a significant advantage over an army where there is suspicion, divisiveness, or a lack of moral direction. He sees moral strength and integrity as crucial to success in military campaigns. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill inspired the nation with his speech and moral leadership during the Second World War. He kept morale high and rallied the people of Great Britain around a common goal: to resist and overcome Nazism. The British cohesiveness and determination were instrumental in their struggle and eventual victory. As the leader of the American rebel forces, George Washington epitomized the way through his integrity, morality, and ability to inspire his soldiers. He kept the army united and morally strong, regardless of dire odds, proving to be vital to the ultimate victory over the British forces. On the other hand, the Vietnam War is an example where the American military and political leadership failed to maintain morale and unity among the forces and the population. The lack of a clear and ethical approach to the war, along with growing skepticism and public dissent, resulted in demoralization among the troops and a lack of cohesion in the war effort. Meanwhile, the paradise factor encompasses the natural forces and climatic conditions that exert a decisive influence on the field. By maintaining the different aspects of the climate, seasonal changes, and the day and night cycles, the strategist can foresee difficulties, seize opportunities, and ensure that his troops are ready to face the challenges posed by nature. Sun Tzu stressed the importance of studying and adapting to the climate to maximize the efficiency and effectiveness of military operations. He cites factors such as time, seasons, and weather conditions, all of which may have a significant impact on the planning and execution of military strategies. Spring and summer may provide favorable conditions for the protracted campaigns, as the weather is generally milder and the days are longer. But they can also bring challenges, such as drenching rains, which may hamper troop movements and the transportation of supplies. In contrast, autumn and winter may be extremely challenging due to the cold, snow, and ice, hindering the soldiers' mobility and well-being. During these periods, campaigns need additional shelter arrangements, suitable clothing, and extra supplies. Rain can make the terrain muddy, challenging the mobility of personnel and heavy equipment. It can also affect visibility and the effectiveness of weapons. Strong winds can impact the accuracy of long-range firearms and obstruct communication. Favorable winds may be harnessed for operations, such as controlled fires against the enemy. Snow and ice render the terrain slippery and perilous, making movement difficult and risking the risk of incidents. They can also pose health hazards, such as frostbite and hypothermia. Napoleon's Russian invasion was severely affected by the weather. He underestimated its intensity, as it brought heavy snowfalls, extremely low temperatures, and frostbite. Unsuited to these conditions, the French troops sustained catastrophic losses. During the Second World War, the Battle of Stalingrad was plagued by a brutal winter. The German forces, inadequately outfitted for the freezing temperatures, faced enormous difficulties, whereas the Soviets, better adapted and equipped for the harsh climate, resisted and eventually counterattacked, inflicting a German defeat. Accounting for the climate when planning logistics is vital. This includes providing troops with adequate clothing, food, and shelter. The weather may influence the right time to start a campaign or a battle. Unfavorable weather conditions for the enemy can be exploited to gain the upper hand. Sun Tzu instructs that overlooking the weather can lead to failure, while a thorough knowledge of and adaptation to climatic circumstances can provide a significant advantage. Adaptability, flexibility, and preparation are crucial to overcoming the weather challenges. The land factor, i.e., the physical terrain where the conflict unfolds, is a pivotal factor for strategic planning. Learning the local geography, pinpointing strategic locations, controlling supply routes, and using the terrain to one's advantage are essential to obtain a tactical edge and neutralize enemy forces. A good understanding of the terrain is central to making strategic, tactical, and logistical decisions. Sun Tzu identifies different types of terrain, each with its own features and challenges. He typified terrains in terms such as accessible terrain, easy to cross and usually favorable for quick movements and maneuvers. It requires constant monitoring to avoid ambushes. In contrast, dangerous terrain is difficult to cross, such as dense forests, mountains, or swampy terrain. Perfect for ambushes, but dangerous for moving large armies. Neutral terrain can be beneficial or harmful depending on its use. The troops that occupy it first will have a strategic advantage. Narrow terrain means tight or difficult to access areas, such as mountain passageways or bridges. Whoever controls these points can easily fend off outnumbered forces. Hostile terrain is where the enemy has the upper hand. It should be avoided unless necessary. Controlling high ground offers an advantage in vision and defense. Hill or mountain fortifications can be an effective defensive strategy. Rivers and other natural barriers may be used to protect flanks or restrict the enemy's movement options. Selecting the right battleground may spell the difference between victory and defeat. Open terrain can benefit mobile and cavalry forces, while closed terrain can help infantry troops. Having detailed terrain knowledge allows for planning ambushes, sieges, and strategic withdrawals. During the Greco-Persian Wars, King Leonidas led Greeks using the narrow Thermopylae Gorge to their advantage against the numerically superior Persian army. The restricted ground prevented the Persians from exploiting their numbers. The English army, under Henry V, took advantage of Agincourt's muddy and narrow terrain in the 100 Years' War. The ground hampered the movement of the heavy French cavalry and made it easier to deploy the English longbows, resulting in a decisive victory for them. North Africa's desert landscape presented major challenges during the Second World War, but General Erwin Rommel, known as the Desert Fox, successfully used his familiarity with the desert to execute rapid and unexpected maneuvers, often outmaneuvering larger and better equipped Allied forces. Familiarity with the terrain is imperative. Sending out scouts and spies to chart and study the ground can provide crucial information. Tailoring advantages to the type of terrain is key. Tactics that work on flat terrain can be ineffective in mountainous or forested areas. The command factor resides in the figure of the military and political leader. Bravery, decisiveness, intelligence, and the ability to instill confidence are all vital qualities for leading troops to victory. A strong and strategic leader knows how exactly to maintain discipline, motivate his soldiers, and quickly and effectively make decisions in high-pressure situations. Leadership is one of the vital qualities that Sun Tzu emphasizes for victory in any conflict. He stresses that the commander's qualities are paramount to successful military operations. An effective leader not only leads with authority, but also inspires and motivates his troops, making strategic and tactical decisions with savvy and expertise. Sun Tzu stated that a commander must be intelligent and able to make quick and correct assessments. He must have a profound grasp of strategy, tactics, and the ability to adapt quickly to battlefield developments. Honesty and integrity are must-haves to earn the trust of the troops. A genuine leader inspires loyalty and devotion, building a cohesive and motivated force. A leader must be compassionate and caring towards his soldiers. Treating the troops with humanity and respect, addressing their needs, increases morale and commitment to the mission. A leader's fortitude is vital for making difficult and dangerous decisions. A fearless leader does not hesitate when faced with danger and is willing to take calculated risks to win. Keeping discipline is crucial for the army's order and effectiveness. A disciplined commander assures that orders are followed and organization and logistics are efficient, keeping troops together and ready. The commander oversees devising plans and strategies based on a detailed study of the terrain, climate, and enemy abilities. Careful planning and accurate forecasts are all essential. The ability to make swift and effective decisions is required in high-pressure situations. A leader must quickly appraise situations and act resolutely, adapting to ever-changing circumstances. He also needs to inspire and motivate the troops to keep morale high, instilling confidence and decisiveness in the troops. The leader must also efficiently manage resources, guaranteeing that the troops are well supplied and prepared. This involves expertise in logistics, supplies, and equipment maintenance. Clear and efficient communication is critical. A leader must communicate orders and information in such a way that all army branches understand and execute them correctly and in their coordination. Alexander displayed all the qualities mentioned by Sun Tzu. His strategic wisdom, battlefield bravery, and ability to inspire his troops helped him conquer immense territories and create one of history's greatest empires. During the Second World War, as supreme commander of the Allied forces in Europe, Eisenhower displayed remarkable strategic acumen, especially when planning and running D-Day. His ability to bring together and coordinate diverse Allied forces was crucial to the success of the war. During the Second Sino-Japanese War and the Chinese Civil War, Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek was widely reproached for his authoritarian and ineffective leadership. His lack of ability to inspire and motivate his troops, coupled with poor resource management, led to the ultimate defeat of his forces and the deaths of millions of soldiers and civilians. The last major factor is discipline. the ability to maintain order and control within an army. As Sun Tzu put it, discipline is elementary to making sure that orders are followed and that the army operates as a cohesive unit. Without discipline, the army may become unruly and ineffective, vulnerable to raids and unable to respond quickly to battlefield changes. The ability to accurately follow orders in a timely manner is decisive. This assures that the commander's planned strategies and tactics are properly implemented, increasing the chances of success. Also, discipline keeps morale high and the troops motivated. When soldiers see that there is an order and equity in enforcing rules, and that everyone is treated equally, they are more likely to remain motivated and engaged in the mission. The organization of a well-disciplined army comprises a clearly structured organization with a defined chain of command and specific responsibilities. This helps communication, decision-making, and strategy implementation. Discipline is enhanced through rigorous and consistent training. Well-trained soldiers are equipped to deal with different situations and follow orders under pressure. Logistics entails the efficient management of supplies, equipment, and food. Ensuring that troops have all they need to operate effectively is central to sustaining a military campaign. Effective logistics planning means that the troops are always ready and that there are no critical disruptions to operations. The Roman legions were a model of a historically high level of discipline and organization. Their army had a precise structure, intensive training, and an efficient logistical apparatus that allowed for rapid mobility and long-lasting support in far-flung campaigns. Prussia's Frederick the Great also introduced strict discipline and meticulous organization into his army, leading to several decisive victories. Throughout the Falklands War between the United Kingdom and Argentina, the Argentine army encountered serious discipline problems. Many soldiers were raw recruits, poorly trained, and subject to extreme conditions without suitable support. Ineffective leadership and a lack of morale resulted in desertion, insubordination, and misconduct. Poor discipline significantly contributed to the Argentine forces' defeat and surrender on the islands. The Russian Imperial Navy battleship Potemkin was the site of a famous mutiny in 1905. The sailors rebelled against their officers due to poor living standards, spoiled food, and abusive treatment. Lack of discipline and widespread disgruntlement led to the uprising, with several officers and sailors dying as a result. This event not only undermined the fleet's efficiency, but also symbolized the growing dissatisfaction within the Russian armed forces and the country's political unrest. Sun Tzu believed that a general had to fully master these 5 factors. Whoever knows them well will be victorious, and those who neglect them will fail. All warfare is based on deception, Sun Tzu stated. War is a game of illusions, a stage where the mask and outward appearances are as important as reality and the strength of the sword. A war master bends the enemy's perception, twisting reality and leading them to defeat. He believed that war is based on deception, and that battlefield success often depends on the ability to mislead and deceive the opponent. In The Art of War, Sun Tzu introduces 3 elementary deception strategies. He explains that a commander must always seem the opposite of what he truly is. If one is strong, one must appear weak. If one is prepared, one must appear unready. The objective is to make the enemy underestimate one's strength and make them arrogant. By nurturing the opponent's hubris, the strategist leads them to act recklessly, opening gaps for a shattering counterattack. During the Punic War in 216 BC, the Carthaginian general Hannibal fought the Roman army in one of the most famous battles in military history. He deployed a deception method known as double siege. He arranged his forces in such a way to appear weak in the center and strong on the wings. As the Romans attacked the center, assuming it was the vulnerable spot, Hannibal ordered his central troops to gradually retreat, forming a crescent shape. Meanwhile, the wing forces surrounded the Romans on both sides and from behind. The Roman army was surrounded and annihilated, resulting in one of the most devastating defeats in Roman history, with estimated losses up to 70,000 soldiers. Hannibal's genius for misleading Roman perceptions was central to this crushing victory. Sun Tzu argued that the art of deception was applied to the location of the army. Secret movements, disinformation, and using decoy units can lead the enemy to believe that their forces are far away when they are in fact ready to attack. Sun Tzu recommended fabricating misleading situations to fool the enemy about one's real location and intents. This can be accomplished by moving troops so that they seem far away when they are close, or by using lures to divert attention. During the Second World War, British troops led by General Montgomery were planning an offensive against Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps in North Africa. Montgomery resorted to various deceptions to conceal the true location and strength of the offensive. He built a line of dummy inflatable tanks in the south and moved the real ones by night to the north. Moreover, using radio communications and bogus activities created the illusion that the main attack would come from the south. When Montgomery unleashed the main assault in the north, Rommel was taken by surprise, assuming that the focus was on the south. The British offensive was successful and led to the withdrawal of Axis forces from North Africa. The Allied Operation Fortitude duped the Germans about the location of the Normandy landings. False units, inflatable equipment, and radio transmissions led to the illusion that the main attack would happen in Calais, leading the Germans to gather their forces in the wrong spot, ensuring the success of D-Day. Sun Tzu suggested using decoys to bait the enemy into weak positions where they could be easily overwhelmed. This may entail feigning a retreat or leaving valuable resources unprotected to embolden the enemy to hastily advance. Using decoys to lure the enemy into traps. A classic deception tactic is to offer the enemy an apparent advantage, a compelling hook that draws them to a point where their forces can be destroyed. During the War of American Independence, General Daniel Morgan employed a clever tactic against the British forces commanded by Colonel Bannister Tarleton. Morgan divided his troops into 3 lines. He ordered the militiamen line to fire 2 rounds of shots and feign a chaotic retreat. Believing that the Americans were fleeing, the British rushed forward. Their forces were drawn into a vulnerable position between the 2nd and 3rd lines of American regular troops. The American army then surrounded them and inflicted a decisive defeat, capturing or killing a large part of Tarleton's troops. According to Sun Tzu, the art of deception is key to achieving victory in war. Through dissimulation, guile, and mastering the enemy's perception, the strategist turns weakness into strength, distance into proximity, and bait into a trap, molding the fate of the battle in his favor. Divide and conquer. Split up the enemy's forces to fight them in smaller parts. By partitioning the enemy, one weakens their ability to react and coordinate. During the Battle of Austerlitz, also known as the Battle of the Three Emperors, Napoleon Bonaparte was up against the combined Russian and Austrian forces. Napoleon enticed the Allies to attack his right flank, which he deliberately weakened to appear vulnerable. When the Allies pushed forward to exert his perceived weakness, Napoleon delivered a decisive attack in the center, splitting the Allied forces into 2 separate parts. The breakdown of the Allied forces made it possible for Napoleon to defeat each segment individually, resulting in a crushing victory that solidified his control over Central Europe. Surprise attacks. The commander must be capable of spotting opportunities to attack at unexpected times and places to catch the enemy off guard. Surprise can be a powerful weapon that disrupts and demoralizes the opponent. In World War II, Japan planned a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. On December 7, 1941, Japanese forces unleashed a surprise air attack on Pearl Harbor, throwing the Americans completely off guard. The operation was thoughtfully planned and conducted without a prior war declaration, intended to neutralize the U.S. Pacific Fleet. The attack wreaked massive destruction, sinking or damaging 18 ships, including 8 battleships, and destroying around 300 aircraft. Over 2,400 Americans were killed. Using spies and intelligence, getting accurate information about the enemy while hiding one's own movements and intentions is a must. Intelligence is crucial for planning and running effective deception strategies. In Alexander the Great's campaigns against the Persian Empire, gathering information about enemy movements and plans was essential to his success. Alexander relied on spies and agents to gather information about the size, deployment, and intentions of the Persian forces. Before the Battle of Gaugamela, Alexander was provided with in-depth information about the position of Darius II's army, which enabled him to plan his strategy effectively. Using the information acquired, Alexander succeeded in pulling off a brilliant tactical maneuver, breaking through the Persian line and scoring a decisive battle victory. The triumph at Gaugamela confirmed Alexander's dominance over the Persian Empire. Sun Tzu's deception and maneuvering principles are widely available, not only in military contexts, but also in business, politics, and sports. The ability to deceive competitors, create misleading impressions, and use clever tactics can offer significant advantages in any competition. Sun Tzu instructs that war is the art of deception, and the ability to deceive the enemy may be the key to victory. Feigning weakness, setting up illusory distances, and using decoys are key tactics for baffling and unsettling the opponent. These principles, shown in numerous historical examples, are still relevant in many modern areas of life. In The Art of War, Sun Tzu writes widely on the importance of using strategy and intelligence in warfare, often stressing that the optimal victory is one achieved without needless destruction. He argues that the greatest war skill is to win without any fighting. He stressed the importance of strategy over sheer brute force. A wise leader, according to Sun Tzu, uses guile, intelligence, and stealth to defeat the enemy before they even reach the battlefield. Non-combat triumph is the ultimate form of success. The founder of the Achaemenid Empire, Cyrus the Great, conquered Babylon without a single major battle. Using strategy over brute force, Cyrus harnessed intelligence and propaganda to build support within Babylon. He tapped into widespread unrest among the Babylonian population and bargained with the priests and aristocracy, pledging respect for religious traditions and fair governance. Cyrus also used military tactics to distract the attention of the Babylonian forces, enabling his army to enter the city without significant resistance. Consequently, Cyrus took Babylon without hardly a fight and was welcomed as a liberator by the population. This outstanding achievement of overcoming without any battle allowed him to expand his empire with minimal losses and utmost approval. Richard I of England, known as Richard the Lionheart, was on his way to the Holy Land during the Third Crusade. In 1191, he took it upon himself to invade the island of Cyprus, which was under the Byzantine Emperor Isaac I Komnenos' control. Richard stormed Cyprus and ravaged the island, pillaging towns and villages. He captured Isaac I Komnenos and took control of the island, serving as a crusading ground of operations. The brutal invasion and sweeping looting sparked intense resentment among the locals and the crippling loss of priceless infrastructure. The extensive destruction made logistics and supplies for the crusading forces more complicated. Rather than a thriving base of operations, Richard had difficulty keeping his troops supplied. Richard's reckless aggression in Cyprus also harmed his relations with other Crusader leaders and potential allies, who viewed his actions as excessively brutal and counterproductive. Cyprus's havoc had negative consequences for Richard the Lionheart. While he temporarily established control over the island, he ultimately failed to turn Cyprus into an effective support camp for the crusade. Sun Tzu lectured that the best achievement is one that leaves any enemy undisturbed. He implies that it is better to capture cities, resources, and armies without destroying them, as this greatly maximizes the benefits of conquest. On the contrary, destruction wastes resources and impairs the victor's ability to fully benefit from the victory. But Sun Tzu considered that a strategy of enforcing surrender through sieges, while often useful for preserving the besieged structure and compelling the surrender of the circled enemy, was a last resort approach. He explained that sieges are lengthy, costly, and dangerous, and can lead to major losses for the assailant. He advised, instead, to find ways to overcome the enemy through strategic and tactical ploys that would prevent the need for protracted sieges. Sun Tzu pointed out that impatience is one of the biggest weaknesses of a military commander. An impatient general may lead to attack before he is sufficiently prepared, or he may underestimate the enemy's resistance. This rush can produce uncoordinated and ineffective attacks, leaving troops at unnecessary risk. Sun Tzu said that a third of soldiers can perish in a precipitous attack. These losses are disastrous not only regarding human lives, but also in overall morale and the army's ability to fight. Wipeout and demoralized troops are less effective and more prone to subsequent defeats. Sieges are especially hazardous and costly. Impatience during it can prompt repeated attempts to break through fortifications, with heavy casualties as a result. The city, meanwhile, can stay well defended, well supplied, and largely untouched, hoping that the attacking army will wear itself out. Throughout the First Crusade, Impatient and ill-prepared for a prolonged siege, the Crusaders repeatedly raided Jerusalem's defenses. Notwithstanding the heavy initial casualties, they eventually took the city, but at a price of tremendous human losses. Sun Tzu also taught that patience and readiness are essential qualities for a military commander. Impatience can often culminate in disastrous decisions, especially during sieges, where losses may be overwhelming and the objective may prove elusive. A wise general must make strategy, preparation, and the intelligent use of resources a priority to achieve victory with as few losses as possible. He further underlined the importance of adapting tactics to the terrain and the circumstances. He taught that flexibility and the ability to adjust one's approach according to the context are key to success. When tackling the number advantage issue and how a commander must tailor his strategies according to the number of troops compared to the enemy, he established a rule in war based on ratio of forces between opposing armies. If your army is 10 to 1 in comparison to the enemy's, encircle it, making sure it has nowhere to run and cannot reassemble. If your army is 5 to 1, then attack. Take advantage of your numerical superiority to overwhelm the enemy. If your army is twice as strong as the enemy's, split yours into 2, letting you strike on several fronts, or engage the enemy in multiple ways, stirring up havoc and taking advantage of your numerical superiority. If both armies are equal, battle is an option, but it must be waged with caution and painstaking planning. Faced with a slight disadvantage, direct battle is best avoided, instead pursuing a strategic or tactical advantage before engaging. If the odds are stacked against you, retreat is the best option to preserve your strength for future battles. Sun Tzu argued that even if a small, strong-willed army can put up a fight, it will inevitably be defeated by a superior force. He identified 5 key elements for victory. The first is knowing when and when not to fight, as knowing the appropriate circumstances for battle is decisive. The second is knowing how to deal with superior and inferior forces, varying tactics according to the enemy's relative strength. The third is to have a united army in spirit, with cohesion and high morale at all ranks. The fourth is to be ready and attack when the enemy is unprepared, decisively leveraging the surprise factor. The fifth is to have the ability to command an army without interference from the sovereign, allowing for quick and effective decisions. During the Second Battle of El Alamein in North Africa, British commander Bernard Montgomery fought the Axis troops led by Erwin Rommel. Montgomery had significant numerical superiority and split his troops to launch several simultaneous strikes against different sectors of the German lines. When one section of the British forces engaged the enemy head-on, another carried out flanking operations. The splitting of the British forces burdened the Axis defensive positions, leading to a decisive victory that signaled a turning point in the North African War theater. Just prior to the Battle of Hastings, King Harold II of England was up against a Viking invasion led by Harald Hardrada of Norway, with the number of soldiers from both armies being roughly equal, notwithstanding the slight advantage for the Vikings. Harold II became aware of the Viking invasion and chose not to directly confront them while they were highly organized. Instead, he rapidly marched his troops to Stamford Bridge and ambushed the Vikings when they were not yet in battle formation and ready. The English surprise and swift attack brought about a decisive British victory over the Vikings, undermining a significant threat before the ensuing Norman invasion. In the 1777 American War of Independence, George Washington faced vastly superior British forces. The American general shunned direct engagement, retreating strategically and using guerrilla attacks to erode the British, and, though he lost New York, Washington preserved his army and ultimately scored important victories, such as the Battle of Trenton. Sun Tzu concluded that knowing yourself and the enemy is the key to victory. If you know both, you do not need to fear the outcome of 100 battles. If you only know yourself but not the enemy, then for every victory there will be a defeat. If you know neither yourself nor the enemy, you will fall in every battle. These tenets reveal the importance of strategy, of adapting to circumstances, and of having a profound knowledge of both the one's own army and the enemy to achieve victory with as little direct conflict as possible. In his work, The Art of War, Sun Tzu stresses that planning is essential for victory, arguing that battles are won even before they are directly fought. He believed that the true strength of an army rests in meticulous strategic preparation, including assessing the terrain, carefully positioning the troops, and grasping the conditions of both the army and the enemy. Sun Tzu claims that when a general finds himself in a favorable position, the outcome of adequate preparation and a well-planned strategy has already achieved half of the victory. This edge allows the army to be safe, ready to take advantage of the enemy's weaknesses without leaving its own exposed. By contrast, Sun Tzu warned that anyone who engages in combat without proper groundwork is heading for failure. Lack of planning opens vulnerabilities and leaves the army subject to mistakes and upsets. According to Sun Tzu, acting rashly without knowing all the factors at play is like handing over control to the enemy and creating ideal conditions for defeat. He therefore teaches that a commander who invests in time learning about the battlefield, studying his opponent, and judging the best time to attack or not to strike is in a better position. The Battle of Midway was a major turning point in the Pacific War between the United States and Japan. The United States, led by Admiral Chester Nimitz, had broken the Japanese naval codes and learnt that an attack had been planned for Midway. The Japanese forces were taken by surprise and lost their precious aircraft carriers, whilst the Americans suffered minor losses. Preparation and prior strategic knowledge of Japanese movements handed the US a decisive victory, changing the outcome of the Pacific War. The British Empire decided to invade Afghanistan when the First Anglo-Afghan War broke out to prevent Russian expansion in Central Asia. The British initially succeeded in occupying Kabul, but the situation quickly escalated. The British underestimated Afghan resistance and the intricate terrain. They attempted to control Afghan territory without local support, angering the tribes and stirring up resentment among the population. The British Army was also poorly prepared for Afghanistan's climate and rugged terrain, and its supply lines were susceptible to attack. The British decided to retreat from Kabul in 1842, but the withdrawal was a debacle. British troops and the civilians with them came under sustained attack along their route, and almost all of them were massacred before they made it to British India. The First Anglo-Afghan War is remembered as one of the British Empire's biggest military defeats, and a textbook example of the pitfalls of improper planning and a lack of understanding of local dynamics. This illustrates how a lack of readiness and proper planning, bearing in mind all the factors, can lead to military catastrophe, even for well-equipped and strong powerhouses. Sun Tzu addressed the concept of invincibility in a unique way. In his view, being invincible is not just about vanquishing the enemy on the battlefield, but more importantly, about averting situations where the enemy can exploit weaknesses. For Sun Tzu, this invincibility is reached by such thorough and strategic preparation that the army is rendered immune to successful attacks. He stated that a wise commander builds such a strong position that the opponent cannot find a vulnerable point to attack. He also taught that the true military expertise lies not in gloriously winning battles, but in dissuading the enemy from pursuing an attack. This invincibility is safer and more lasting, as it minimizes the risk of direct confrontation and the wear and tear that a battle entails. Invincibility starts within the army itself, assuring discipline, unity, and morale among the troops. A cohesive and properly assembled army is much more difficult for the enemy to weaken. An invincible general does not reveal his true power and willfully deceives the enemy about his strengths and weaknesses. In hiding his potential and using deception, he effectively makes it difficult for the enemy to reckon with an action that could lead to victory. Sun Tzu defended that the invincible commander carefully chooses his battles. He does not enter clashes where the risks outweigh the gains, preserving his strength and wearing the enemy down psychologically. Flexibility and adaptation are key to maintaining invincibility. An invincible general manages to use the terrain and circumstances to his favor, repositioning himself and adjusting his strategies as needed to ensure that there are no openings for enemy attacks. Mao Zedong used the concept of motion and guerrilla warfare against Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist forces during the Chinese Civil War, refraining from direct battles and instead eroding the enemy gradually. He admitted that, with his limited forces and inadequate weapons, he could not face the nationalist army in direct combat. He instead focused on covering up his vulnerabilities and moving constantly, establishing bases in rural areas and harnessing his knowledge of the terrain to hamper the detection of communist forces. Mao's tactics eroded the nationalists, who spent substantial resources without managing to defeat the communist army. The strategic stance gave the communists an aura of virtual invincibility by minimizing their vulnerabilities and eschewing battles where they were at a disadvantage, until they could solidify their forces and eventually win the war. By applying Sun Tzu's concept of invincibility, where minimizing vulnerabilities and deterring direct attacks proved effective in historical contexts, it became clear that true invincibility lies in averting opportunities for the enemy to successfully attack. Sun Tzu stressed that tactical flexibility is a crucial skill for any effective commander. In his view, war was a dynamic setting, where the battlefield conditions and elements are constantly changing. A commander who sticks to rigid, unbending plans is in danger of being surprised and seeing victory slip through their fingers. He lectured that a true leader is one capable of adapting quickly, adjusting his strategy as needed to deal with unexpected threats and seize opportunities as they arise during battle. Predictable patterns and repetitive measures leave the army vulnerable, as the enemy can predict and neutralize tactics. He urged commanders to be unpredictable, changing their formations and movements to avoid the adversary spotting a pattern and adapting to it. Sun Tzu believed that flexibility is not just a matter of reacting quickly, but doing it with intelligence and strategy. The response must be measured and accurate, based on a careful appraisal of the new situation. This response allows the commander not only to defend himself against surprise attacks, but to use change decisively to create an upper hand and surprise the enemy. Sun Tzu explained that a successful commander must be like water, flowing and adapting to the landscape he encounters. He must tailor his tactics to the circumstances, never holding on to a single approach. This adaptability lets the leader evade traps, capitalize on the enemy's vulnerabilities, and keep his force protected. German General Rommel proved his capacity for tactical flexibility during the Second World War by adapting the 88 anti-aircraft gun for an anti-tank role. This surprising decision was decisive in many North African battles. Rommel frequently used the 88 cannon in flexible defensive formations, allowing his forces to retain positions even under attack from superior armored vehicles. With its accuracy and penetrating power, the 88 cannon countered Allied armored formations and provided an advantage for the Germans. Rommel often redeployed these cannons quickly after engagements, preserving the element of surprise, making it difficult for the Allies to detect and neutralize his defenses. Rommel succeeded in balancing the German forces against superior Allied tanks, such as the British Matilda, and subsequently the American Sherman. This ingenious use of conventional weapons for new purposes exemplified the tactical flexibility prized by Sun Tzu. Rommel proved that the true skill of a general lies in the power to adjust strategies and use available sources in new ways. The deployment of the 88 cannon as an anti-tank weapon illustrated the very essence of tactical flexibility and allowed Rommel to overcome the limitations of his own arsenal to maintain the battlefield advantage. Tactical flexibility for Sun Tzu was a blend of prudence, speed, and constant observation. A battle is fluid, and only a leader who fully understands and respects this flux can keep the advantage, use his forces to the best of their ability, and defeat the enemy. Sun Tzu argues that an army's invincibility is grounded in its defensive capacity, and the ability to prevent vulnerabilities can be exploited by the enemy. He claims that defense is not a weak stance, but an active and intelligent strategy to retain strength, force the enemy to make mistakes, and wait for the right moment to attack. Sun Tzu asserts that an invincible army is one which gives the enemy no opportunity to attack it successfully. In short, the commander must anticipate the enemy's intentions and position himself in such a way as to counteract them before they become a threat. Defense is the cornerstone of invincibility, as it protects resources and preserves the army's strength. A well-positioned army compels the enemy to attack in disadvantageous conditions, expending its own resources and energy, while the defending army stays in a strong position. If the army is in a well-prepared defensive position, the enemy is pushed to attack, exposing himself to errors and vulnerabilities. This wear and tear may be exploited by the defending army to strike back at a moment of enemy weakness. Sun Tzu suggests that invincibility through defense is tied directly to having patience. He implies that a commander must remain on the defensive until a clear opportunity to attack successfully arises. Strategically waiting is essential for battlefield success. The Chinese Great Wall, built over several centuries and by various dynasties, is one of the most ambitious defensive strategies in history, conceived to protect Chinese territory from the constant invasions of nomadic tribes such as the Xiongnu and the Mongols. Formed by several connected fortifications, watchtowers, and military garrisons, the wall not only functioned as a physical barrier, but also as an early warning system that allowed Chinese troops to mobilize rapidly against imminent threats. While not completely impenetrable, the Great Wall forced invaders to waste considerable resources and energy either trying to overcome or circumvent it. The wall also offered a psychological advantage, symbolizing the determination and resilience of the Chinese state. This towering structure not only physically shielded China, but also dissuaded attacks, forcing invaders to reckon with whatever the gains were worth the effort and sacrifices required to overcome it. In World War I, the trench system became an example of defensive invincibility, profoundly altering the ways in which battles were fought. Each side built vast networks of trenches along the Western Front, spanning hundreds of kilometers from the English Channel to Switzerland. These entrenchments included multiple defensive lines, with fortified firing positions, underground shelters, and troop movement corridors, making them almost impenetrable to head-on attacks. This defensive approach rendered it extremely difficult for any side to make a significant breakthrough without suffering catastrophic losses. The trenches were shielded by barbed wire, minefields, and expertly placed machine guns, which mowed down the attacking troops before they could reach the enemy positions. The terrain between the trenches, known as no man's land, was ravaged by constant bombardment, which made it even lethal for anyone who tried to cross it. This kind of stalemate forced commanders to reconsider their strategies, leading to the development of new weapons and tactics, including tanks, poison gas, and air bombardment, to break the deadlock. But the trench system remained a dominant feature of the war until its end. The Red Army adopted a strategic defensive approach inside the city at the Battle of Stalingrad, turning the urban terrain into a true resistance camp. Stalingrad's geography, with its shattered buildings, narrow streets, and rubble, was used by the Soviets to neutralize the German advantage in weaponry and open-field combat tactics. The Soviet forces took up positions in fortified locations, such as factories, residential buildings, and underground, pushing the Germans to fight in extremely harsh and unpredictable conditions. This sort of urban combat quickly depleted the resources and morale of the German army, who struggled to marshal their forces and maintain their supply lines. Each German breakthrough cost enormous human and material losses, given that the Soviets, with their carefully planned defensive posture, took advantage of the terrain to carry out ambushes, sneak attacks, and ongoing resistance. The intense fighting depleted the German energy, allowing the Soviets to reorganize their forces and gather reinforcements. When the Germans were worn down and sufficiently vulnerable, following months of unrelenting battles and no considerable progress, the Red Army unleashed a decisive counteroffensive known as Operation Uranus. This maneuver consisted of coordinated attacks on the flanks of the German forces, where less experienced and ill-prepared troops from their Axis allies were stationed. The operation surrounded the German 6th Army inside Stalingrad, cutting it off from the rest of the Axis forces. This encirclement, together with sheer exhaustion and lack of supplies, resulted in the German surrender, scoring one of the biggest military defeats of the Second World War and a crucial turning point in the conflict. Sun Tzu emphasizes that mastering pace and initiative is essential for success in any conflict. In his view, the ability to shape the battle conditions, such as its timing and location, provides a significant strategic advantage. An army that keeps pace forces the enemy to react, losing its ability to act proactively. The notion is related to Sun Tzu's principle that war is an art of handling and controlling the scenario to ensure superiority without relying on force alone. Sun Tzu affirms that the surest way to maintain the initiative is to force the enemy to respond to one's actions. It puts the adversary in a defensive position, preventing them from implementing their plans. A reactive army is often at a loss, as it fights at the pace dictated by the opponent. A well-prepared army can anticipate the enemy's movements and adjust its actions accordingly. Readiness is not only a protection, but also a way of setting up situations in which the enemy is forced to act rashly or at a disadvantage. Sun Tzu proposes that the battle pace should be dictated by the army that has the upper hand. Switching between rapid attacking movements and strategic calm spells can disorientate the enemy, keeping them on edge and unable to anticipate the next moves. When the enemy is constantly forced to react, they are prone to making mistakes and becoming unruly. Sun Tzu instructs that the commander must take advantage of these baffling moments to inflict decisive damage. Sun Tzu explains the importance of being the first on the battlefield. This means positioning one's forces advantageously before the enemy arrives, thereby allowing one to control the combat conditions. He also instructs how fundamental it is to adapt to the enemy's actions while retaining the initiative, making them fight on your terms and at the pace you set. The 1704 Battle of Blenheim provides an example of controlling pace and initiative in war. During the War of Spanish Succession, the Duke of Marlborough conducted a surprise 100-kilometer march to strategically position himself on the Danube, stunning the Franco-Bavarian forces. Marlborough dictated the pace by forcing the French to slow down and react to his maneuvers. He He resorted to swift and unpredictable attacks to break up the enemy, capitalizing on loopholes in their defenses. He divided the enemy's efforts in battle, isolating their forces and compelling them to fight at a disadvantage. This approach led to a decisive victory, shattering the French and Bavarian position in Central Europe and providing the effectiveness of strategic control of pace and initiative on the battlefield. The German Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War, was an example of controlling pace and initiative during the Second World War. This German strategy involved combining rapid, highly coordinated attacks between infantry, armor, and aviation to disrupt the enemy before it could react. The Germans struck in a concentrated manner, cutting through defensive lines and rapidly advancing inland, breaking down communications and destabilizing the enemy command. This forced their opponents to respond in a fragmented manner, preventing them from organizing effective defenses. The Blitzkrieg was instrumental in the Polish and French campaigns, enabling quick and dramatic victories that brought Germany to a dominant position in Europe in the early years of the war. Napoleon Bonaparte was an expert in managing the battle pace through his movement warfare strategy. He used fast and precise movements to isolate parts of the enemy army, forcing his opponents to react to his maneuvers rather than carrying out their own plans. His talent for splitting up enemy forces and attacking each segment individually allowed him to overcome numerically superior armies. This was crucial in victories such as Ulm and Jena Auerstedt, where his skill at dictating the pace and harnessing the enemy's disorganization further solidified his reputation as one of the greatest strategists in military history. Among the greatest military strategists in history, Sun Tzu emphasized that a leader's qualities could be both their greatest strength and their greatest vulnerability. His treatise, The Art of War, cautions that some traits, while often perceived as virtues, may become harmful or even fatal when taken to extremes. The 5 perilous traits illustrate how a leader's lack of moderation in certain characteristics can significantly influence the fate of an army. According to Sun Tzu, military leadership extends beyond tactical expertise. It requires profound self-awareness and emotional equilibrium. Through the study of these 5 traits, we gain insight into the delicate boundary between virtue and flaw, revealing how a leader's decisions shape either triumph or downfall. Reckless bravery stands out as one of the primary dangerous traits identified by Sun Tzu. Even though courage is a fundamental quality for any military leader, an excess of it can result in impulsive actions with disastrous consequences. A commander driven by unchecked boldness may rush into decisions without thorough analysis, leaving them vulnerable to enemy deception. Recognizing this, adversaries may exploit such impulsiveness, leading the overly daring leader into well-laid traps or precarious situations. History offers a compelling example of this trait in Napoleon Bonaparte's ill-fated invasion of Russia in 1812. Overconfidence in his strategic genius led him to underestimate the brutal Russian winter, a miscalculation that resulted in catastrophe. Neglecting critical elements like logistics and the severe weather, he assumed sheer determination and experience would suffice for victory. However, the consequences were devastating. His army succumbed to starvation, freezing temperatures, and relentless enemy attacks, culminating in one of his most significant defeats. A similarly tragic outcome befell General George Armstrong Custer at the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876. Famous for his fearlessness, Custer misjudged the strength and coordination of the Native American forces under Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. In pursuit of a swift and glorious victory, he divided his troops into smaller detachments, inadvertently exposing them to ambush. His miscalculations proved fatal, as his forces were swiftly overwhelmed, leading to his death and the near-total annihilation of his men. The incident serves as a powerful warning of how unchecked bravery can be as dangerous as cowardice. Avoidance of risk to an extreme degree also poses a significant threat to leadership, according to Sun Tzu. When a commander is excessively cautious, they may fail to act decisively, missing crucial opportunities in the battlefield. While strategic prudence is necessary, an overly defensive approach enables the enemy to dictate the tempo of war, ultimately placing the hesitant leader at a disadvantage. General George McClellan, a key Union commander in the American Civil War, exemplifies this trait. His reluctance to engage in direct combat, even when holding a superior position, allowed Confederate forces under Robert E. Lee to maneuver freely. Preferring fortification over confrontation, he consistently overestimated enemy strength and delayed offensives. His excessive caution prolonged the war, squandering chances to deliver a decisive blow that could have led to an earlier resolution. Although compassion is an admirable trait in a leader, too much of it can erode discipline and weaken command effectiveness. Sun Tzu warns that an overly lenient general may struggle to enforce necessary discipline, fearing unpopular decisions that could displease subordinates. This reluctance to take firm action may create gaps in leadership, making the army less effective in carrying out its objectives. A striking contrast in military leadership can be seen in British commander Douglas Haig during World War I. His rigid strategies led to immense casualties, drawing heavy criticism. However, the opposite extreme, a leader who avoids difficult decisions to maintain favor, can be equally destructive. An unwillingness to impose discipline or implement unpopular strategies may result in severe battlefield failures, offering adversaries an exploitable weakness. An inflexible approach to military doctrine is another perilous trait highlighted by Sun Tzu. While strict adherence to established strategies can be an asset, a commander who refuses to adapt to shifting battlefield conditions risks failure. A lack of tactical flexibility can lead to missed opportunities or susceptibility to enemy countermeasures, even when initial conditions favor the rigid leader. The Battle of Crécy in 1346, during the Hundred Years' War, serves as an instructive example. French forces, relying on traditional cavalry charges, repeatedly attacked English longbowmen, who held fortified positions on higher ground. Instead of adjusting their strategy, the French persisted in their conventional tactics, leading to a devastating defeat. The failure to recognize and adapt to the English army's innovative use of archers sealed their downfall. A similarly rigid mindset contributed to Germany's struggles in World War I, particularly in the execution of the Schlieffen Plan. Intended as a rapid invasion strategy, the plan hinged on a swift strike through Belgium into France. However, its rigid implementation ignored logistical challenges and shifting wartime realities. By stubbornly adhering to the initial strategy, German forces found themselves overextended, ultimately facing prolonged multi-front warfare that drained resources and contributed to their defeat. Arrogant pride presents yet another significant risk in military leadership, according to Sun Tzu. When a general becomes too assured, they may underestimate their opponents, disregard strategic warnings, and alienate valuable advisors. This overconfidence not only distorts judgment, but also fractures internal unity, weakening the effectiveness of the army. A well-documented case of excessive arrogance can be seen in the Roman general Publius Quintilius Varus during the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD. Ignoring multiple warnings and strategic advice, he pressed forward into treacherous and unfamiliar terrain controlled by Germanic tribes under Arminius. Convinced that the discipline and numerical superiority of the Roman legions would guarantee success, Varus failed to implement adequate security measures, vastly underestimating the organizational capacities of the Germanic forces. The consequence was catastrophic, the complete destruction of 3 Roman legions, marking one of the most crushing defeats in the history of Rome. A similar error in judgment occurred during World War II, when Adolf Hitler assumed direct command over military operations. His unwillingness to heed the advice of seasoned generals, coupled with his consistent underestimation of the Allies, led to disastrous strategic blunders. One of the most damaging of these was his insistence on prohibiting tactical retreats on the Eastern Front, a decision that resulted in massive and avoidable losses for the German army. The 5 perilous traits Sun Tzu outlines reveal how qualities often regarded as virtues can, without moderation, become a leader's downfall. In the realm of command, he underscores the necessity of strategic leadership that rationally evaluates risks and opportunities, finds a balance between discipline and compassion, remains adaptable and responsive to battlefield conditions, acknowledges personal limitations, and seeks counsel when necessary. These insights transcend military leadership, proving equally applicable in business, politics, and even sports. Striking the right equilibrium between these characteristics is what ultimately defines an effective leader.